Hi everyone, so in today's video I'm going to be talking you guys through 10 books plus a little bonus one. It's actually 11 books, but I think 11 sounds like an ugly title. That I think would be really great if you wanted to get into reading. You used to be a reader and then you stopped and you suddenly kind of like picked up interest in it, or you picked up like just a desire to get into it. Or if you literally just haven't read a book since you were like 10, then these books would also be great if you suddenly felt inspired now that you're away from required reading and you can read whatever the heck you want to. They cover a bunch of different genres. I haven't categorized this video. I was going to do a video of books that I read super quickly because I thought that would be good for people who are trying to get into reading, but then I thought it's less so about how quickly I read these books than how kind of engaging they were. That kind of made me want to pick up more books after I finished these ones, if that makes any sense. And I thought with it being the new year that it would be good to give you guys these recommendations now, because I think that a lot of people set their kind of New Year's resolutions or their New Year's goals. Either A, I want to read more books, or B, I want to read like full stop, like I want to start reading. Without further ado, let's go on to the video. So the first book I have to mention here is a tiny little book, and that's the reason why I think it'd be great. It's Letters to a Young Poet by rilke. So this is part of the Penguin Little Black Classics collection. These books cost £1. You can buy them in store or online. Generally they're actually cheaper in store because sometimes like with shipping and everything, or they're kind of marked up online. These books are great because they're all tiny, but if you want to kind of like tick off having read a classic, then this could be a good one. I haven't read any other than this book in particular, so this is kind of the one that I want to recommend to you. Plus this is literally a 5-star read, like one of my favorite ever books. I read it in 2021. I completely fell in love with it. Rilke was a poet himself. He's famous for having written an extraordinary amount of letters in his lifetime. He was particularly well known for actually responding to all of his fan mail, and he used to give really beautifully detailed responses to these letters and actually really take into account what everyone had said to him. So this little book follows a exchange of letters that he had between him and an aspiring writer who he didn't know at all, but they just kind of like kept up this correspondence. Some of it is kind of like general life advice, but a lot of it is directed at creatives. If you work in any kind of creative field, or like you just have an interest or a hobby in something creative, that's like fine art, or it's photography, or it's writing, or video production, literally anything, even crochet or anything like that, is wonderful. And there's so many beautiful lines. Let me read you a line from it because I think that is what could really get you hooked. You really do feel like you're like part of this letter exchange, so this is one of my favourite little passages. And if I have anything else to say to you, it is this: do not think that the person who is trying to console you lives effortlessly among the simple, quiet words that sometimes make you feel better. His life is full of troubles and sadness and falls far short of them, but if it were any different, he could never have found the words that he did. Stunning. Beautiful. And it like really pulls at your heartstrings if you've ever kind of suffered in life, which I know we all have, but you know, to what extent this book becomes more impactful. Next up, we have a very different tone, a much lighter book, and that is Shatter by tahereh. So this is for all of my people who read The Hunger Games, who read Divergent, who read... what's another dystopian? I only read The Hunger Games. Like, I was die-hard Hunger Games, but this is another dystopian. It was written in a similar era, a little bit after those ones. It's just a super easy read. And I think that if you were kind of a reader, like during those kind of Hunger Games Twilight years, then your Twilight years, lol, then you could like really enjoy this one because it's kind of reminiscent of those. It is like a completely different tone. I read The Hunger Games when I was like a lot younger, obviously, like 12 years ago at this point, and then I read this book like only a couple of years ago, and what really kind of like drew me into this book was how kind of fresh and unique it felt, like for a dystopian, but it also gave me the same vibes as I felt, like the kind of comfort vibes I felt reading Hunger Games, which I know is ridiculous to feel comfort vibes with a dystopian book, but you know, if you were there, you were there. If you know, you know, you know. This was a super quick read. I read it literally in like a couple of days. The writing's just super easy to get through, the story's engaging, the characters are good. It's just fun, basically. And also what's great about this is that there's a huge community of Shatter fans. It's also part of a series, so if you read this first book, then you feel like immediately within like a little book world, and I feel like that would encourage you to read more books as well. So that's the next book. Next book I have to mention is another kind of one along those lines, but this book is for all the people who read like a lot of like those books that we all read growing up, like I was just going through, but they want something fresh, perhaps good for someone who has been a reader, has then kind of stopped and has kind of like felt the pull to pick up a book again, but is also done, like sick of everything, and they want something new and exciting, you know, something with a spark. That's how I describe this book. And that is Scythe by Neal Shusterman. I never stop going on about this series. I'm literally obsessed with it. Basically, Scythe is I didn't describe Shatter. Scythe is set in a world where every single illness is cured, there's no poverty, there's no Like, there's basically everything. This world is perfection, essentially. In order to control the population, these people called scythes are appointed, who are in charge of kind of like removing themselves from society in order to murder, lol, legally murder members of society. But people kind of like choose how they die. If you're gonna have to be killed by someone, this is the way you're gonna want to be killed. But of course these scythes are still people, and so their own kind of prejudices weave into their decisions on who should live and who should die. It just becomes hugely corrupt, and it's fantastic. There's so much depth to these books, but they are YA, like the Shusterman series, and they are kind of reminiscent of a dystopian, but there's so much more to it. It's a trilogy, but as they get longer as they go throughout the series, and this book itself is like 400 pages, but it didn't feel at all like that, and it just becomes more and more intriguing the further you read into it. I think this could really hook you and be stunning. Basically, I would recommend it. Also, these covers are fantastic. The girls that get it, get it. The girls that don't read it. That sounded like a threat. It was not. I just really recommend those books. Second book's my fave. That book is good though. Kind of gets you hooked in the series, which is important. Next book I have to mention, I don't actually have with me. It's one I'm unhauled, and it's not because I didn't enjoy it. I just didn't feel the need to hold on to it. But I do think this is a great book because it just kept me entertained all the way through. It was kind of fun and light, and sometimes that's what you need. Different tone from like the depressing dystopian slash major like philosophical things going on in Scythe and Shatter Me and even Rilke's book, and that is The Flatshare by Beth. So this is a rom-com like through and through. It follows these two people. They share a flat together, but the guy's a nurse and he works night shifts, and the girl works in publishing, and so she works during the day, and they only have one bed in this flat, so they basically time it so that while he is at work she's asleep, and while she's at work he's asleep. Their lives kind of never cross paths despite living in the exact same building, and eventually they start leaving each other notes. There's this whole kind of mystery kind of law case that goes on at the same time. There's travel in it. It's very kind of British. If you like kind of British humour and British kind of mundane life, then that could be interesting for you, and it's just like a good book. Beth is a really beloved author, so I really do think this one could be a win if you're into, or you think you could be into, like a rom-com kind of thing, like a light romance. Next book I have to mention is a little bit darker, but this is fantastic and also extremely kind of like popular fiction. It's the same as The Flatshare, and that is Everything I Never Told You by Celeste. So I read this book in 2019, and this was my second favourite book of the year. My first favourite book of the year was Tahereh, which is the sequel to Scythe, but this one was like literally absolutely 5 out of 5 stars. Amazing. So I read this via audiobook, and I would really recommend the audiobook of this because even the audiobook had me like in tears by the end. And I think that if you are trying to get into reading, then audiobooks are such a good way to go because you can be like living your life. You don't have to like set aside time to read or anything. You can just be doing a daily chore or like commuting or something, and you can be listening to an audiobook as you're going. You can kind of read at your own pace as well because you can change the like speed of the narration. If you're trying to get into audiobooks, I recommend like really straightforward stories, and this one is fantastic. So this follows a family living in America in the suburbs, and I believe, is it historical fiction? Yes, in the 1970s. You're following Lydia mostly, who is their main child. What am I talking about? Their like eldest child? She's the favourite child. Okay. And she goes missing. So one half of the story is trying to figure out like what happened to her, where she is, etc. And the other half is flashing back in time to the parents growing up and kind of falling in love with each other. These two timelines kind of parallel with each other and then meet in the middle. Circumstances of the present are kind of found within the past. That makes any sense. This is fantastic. Again, there's so much depth to it, but I know a lot of like popular fiction is mystery novels, and this is like a great mystery novel in itself. It's very moving. There's no point where I was like, I'm like kind of bored of this book, I want to get it done. Like, it felt amazing all the way through. I need to reread it physically and annotate it. It's such a beautiful story, and discusses really important topics about the kind of female experience and also growing up Chinese American in a world that is not entirely accepting, particularly in the 70s. Next book I have to mention is another kind of like hard hitter, but another beautiful story. Everything I Never Told You is adult. This one is in fact YA, and that is The Perks of Being a Wallflower by chbosky. If you are around my age and you didn't read this when you're younger, you probably definitely watched the film. The film is beautiful. The script is written and it's produced, I think, or something like that. Directed by the author. That's the reason why the adaptation is so great. If you like the vibes of the film but you were not like obsessed with it, I think you could really enjoy this book, because that's kind of how I felt about it after like having enjoyed the story. I found more kind of substance within the book, which I feel like is probably more the case because you can kind of have the time to meditate on it and reflect on it with your own thoughts as you're reading it. This follows Charlie at high school. It's about Charlie's friendships that he forms. It's about Charlie's past. It's definitely just like a coming of age book. I would recommend looking up trigger warnings. There are parts of it that are very heavy. But why I thought this would be a good one if you're trying to get into reading is that either you've watched the film, already like slightly familiar with the story, so you can like pick up the book and it'll be easier for you, or you can read this book and then watch the film, and you get kind of like immersed in the whole experience of it. Be excited to watch the film while you're reading the book. It's only a short little book. Every single moment there's something happening, and Yeah, mine one's got like really big font. My camera was extremely rude and just cut me off. I've also become aware of how terrible my fringe looks. It's way too long. I'm trying to like work with it without just grabbing a pair of scissors and tacking the whole thing off. Anyways, I don't remember what I was saying. Alright, so the next book I have to mention is my kind of little bonus book, and that is because it is a different kind of genre from the rest of these, although like the real book obviously isn't fiction, but you know, this book just feels separate, and that's because it is a poetry book. So this is 7,300 Days by Isabella Mente, who now goes by Isabella Priez because she's got a second book and that's published under her surname instead of her middle name. This book you can get through Amazon. It was self-published. 7,300 Days, I believe it translates to 20 years, which is the age that Isabella was when she published this book. She published it on her 20th birthday. This is for all my people who are Ruby Core fans, because this is also modern contemporary poetry. I found so much more in this collection than I have in any of Ruby Core's books. I've read all 3 of them. I've given the first couple of books like 3 stars, I believe, and I gave her most recent one like a 2 stars because I just like, that one was a no. I don't mind her stuff. I connect with some poems, with others there's nothing there at all. Almost every single one of these poems I loved. I've tabbed it up. I've reread this several times and it's just fantastic every single time. Really beautiful illustrations like this. The poems in this are kind of short form, but like I said, extremely impactful. You had that kind of like Tumblr moment or Pinterest moment or We Hearted moment with Ruby Core's books. You liked them at the time. You haven't read a lot beyond that, then I would recommend this book. It requires like a little more focus than her books do. They live on the same street, if that makes sense. Don't even know what this is saying, but it was kind of fun. So I'm gonna read you one because I think that's the best way to kind of give you a taste of this. Also, it's super fun to support a self-published creative. A star burns bright during the night until they lose their light. Your allure has always been the way everyone sees you, your shine, which I used to mistake as mine. But I know myself now and don't need to claim what was never mine to keep, because we were never meant to burn bright together. Because you shine, I burn, and when I twinkle, you boil, green with envy. Good night, Starboy. Thank you for the flowers. The drives down the coast. You were there for me in a time I needed it most, but I must shine on my own now. So there's themes of kind of like love and relationships, but there's also a lot to do with her family relationships, and I think that's where I really connected to her personally. How am I 6 minutes into this clip and I've only just started? Okay. Next book we have is a classic. No, it's a modern classic, but it's more of a classic than the other classics I mentioned. Does that make any sense? That's such a stupid thing to say. I think if you wanted to read a classic, this is the one to read. This is the one that I personally would get you to read because it's literally like my favourite book of all time. But I'm going to try and put my biases aside. This is The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald. I was blessed with some beautiful like texts in English literature that I did actually really appreciate. But a remarkable amount of people in my class also absolutely love this text, and I think for a book to be enjoyable during school is quite something. This has fantastic plot, fantastic characters. There's a great pacing in this book, which is why I thought it would be perfect for someone who had not read a great deal of books in their lifetime or was kind of like trying to create a habit of reading, because there's never a moment in this book where something's not happening / like you kind of feel like, come on, let's get it going a little bit. It's very short. Love modern classics. This era people really knew how to write concisely but also effectively and beautifully and profoundly. So it's literally like under 200 pages. All these editions have notes in them so that you can kind of study the text if you want to do that, or you can just read it as a novel, and it is extremely readable. This is no different from any of the other books I'm kind of mentioning on this list in terms of readability. There's endless kind of like symbolism. Again, you can kind of look into, there's so many references to The Great Gatsby in other literature and also films and just everything, and so I think this is kind of like a must read for anyone who's kind of interested in the world and you hate everyone on the earth, because I think that everyone should read this book because it's amazing. And if you want to give annotating a go, this would be a fun one because you're not going to regret it, and some of the lines are just like so incredibly beautiful. I can't even begin. Next book we have is a contemporary. This is also a YA, and this one is again for the kind of people who were on Pinterest and Tumblr growing up, because I think this could be, hang on, let me just bring the book up first. This is Tales All the Way Down by John Green. John Green, I know, for some people alarm bells are going off in their head right now because John Green is just like an ick. Some people absolutely loved him. I liked his work at the time, but I agree. But this book I read years later and I absolutely loved it. I gave this book 4.5 stars. This is a mystery book, but it's following a main character who has OCD, which is something that John Green himself has. So it has own voices rep on the OCD, which is amazing. Because of that, this book feels a lot more personal and a lot more kind of like it steps away from the pretentiousness a little bit. It's a very easy read because all of his books are, but again, the writing is really beautiful. The story itself is engaging because it's kind of this mystery. I also remember it being a very quick read, and I also do think there's probably a really good audiobook for this. This book is also always in the charity shop because it's a John Green book and everyone read them when they were younger. But if you didn't read this book when you were younger, or if you would like a reread, then I definitely recommend it. Next book I have to mention is one that would have gone on my list of like the books that I sped through, because I read this book in literally a couple of days. Like, I was addicted to it, which is kind of funny considering this subject matter. But that is Daisy Jones and the Six by Taylor Jenkins Reid. So I definitely wanted to mention the Taylor Jenkins Reid books because A, super popular books, you see them everywhere. B, she's a fantastic writer, her stories are always so engaging, her characters are incredible, everything is just 10 out of 10. C, it's very current. Like, I just said that her books are popular and whatever, but like this book is getting adapted into a TV show. It's coming out in March, I think. You're gonna want to have read the book, so just makes sense, doesn't it? I can explain why it's such a quick read, despite it being 350 pages. It is told in like interview style format, so it's very kind of broken up. It's also got a fantastic audiobook. Honestly, all round, this is like one of my #1 recommendations, just because of all of these things I've been mentioning. This is definitely something you'll have FOMO on if you don't read it, so just saying, you should read it. No, it's great, honestly. Like, it feels like you're living life, it doesn't feel like you're reading a book. Let's read you a line so I can kind of hook you in. I'm sitting in the back of the plane and I could see Graham getting up. Karen's walking around, Billy's talking to them. I'm watching, trying to figure out what the hell's going on. I turn to Daisy and I say, what do you think they're doing up there? But she's got her nose in some book and she goes, shut up, I'm reading. That's how you'll feel when you read things book and someone tries to interrupt you. And the very final book I have to mention is a little bit similar to Daisy Jones in terms of, let's just get into it. Why do I try and explain these things before I've held the book up? Because I feel like you guys would get it as soon as I held the book up. Six of Crows by Leigh Bardugo. First book in the Six of Crows duology. Also loosely adapted into Shadow and Bone TV series. The Shadow and Bone series, really like the first book, but I honestly would not recommend it. Also, the series just goes so downhill and I think it could put you off reading if anything. Skip Shadow and Bone, I don't care. Like, I know people say that you should read it beforehand. The only thing I would say is good about having read the Shadow and Bone series before reading this book is you don't have to like understand the fantasy world from the start in this book. Like, you already know it from the previous series. I read Six of Crows first before Shadow and Bone. I've now read the Shadow and Bone series, obviously. But the only thing I found with this book was like it was confusing for the first kind of 50 pages. And then after that, everything just made sense. And I was just like, it's fantasy, like that's what you kind of expect anyways. Anyway, that rant's over. This is a TV show, like I said, the first series is already out and the first series covers kind of like sections of this book. Your favourite characters, watch your life and everything. Again, like Daisy Jones, it has fantastic characters, like some of the best ever. This group of people, they're doing a heist, so it's kind of like mystery vibes. It's just like addictive to read, constantly engaging. Despite it being quite long, there's never a point where you notice the length of it. You've got a sequel that's already out. It's a duology. You can say you've read a series, but you really only read 2 books, which is still a series, but you know, it feels more accomplished than it is. A great fandom as well. Fantastic fandom for these books. Literally every single person loves it. You will not recommend it. You will not regret it. Those are all the 10/11 books that I recommend to you if you want to get into reading. I really recommend reading. The escapism is wonderful. The stories are wonderful in general, just like if you want some entertainment. But like kind of above all, what's kind of like drawing people in at the moment is the community of people. It might inspire you to start a Goodreads or start an Instagram or something like that. My Bookstagram, by the way, is Jemima's Life. Always have a link down below, but you know, I never shout it out, so that's that if you guys are interested. It's super easy to find books. They're extremely readable and up your alley. You just need to kind of start reading and then you can kind of figure out what you like for yourself. But I think I've given you guys a decent kind of like start into that. I've kind of opened the gates for you. You're welcome to come in. If you want to subscribe, get more inspired to read and enter the book community a little bit more, then please feel free to. Love to have you here. And yeah, happy reading. I'll see you guys next time for another video. Bye.